Oh, well, fuck. Congress is already botching the next pandemic, which is not surprising. COVID had caught the United States napping to a um, um, basically COVID caught the United States napping to a cacophony of shrieking alarms, and when the novel coronavirus reached our shores, the CDC was spending only $500 million a year on programs that were aimed at tackling any emerging diseases. The National Institutes of Health's total budget for its program on infectious diseases, meanwhile, was roughly $5 billion, with only a small fraction of that sum going towards pandemic prevention. Little to nothing was spent on shoring up U.S. hospital surge capacity, and by contrast, in late 2019, Congress increased the Pentagon's budget, which was which was already larger than the military budgets of China, India, Russia, and the UK, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, Japan, Australia, and Australia combined by $21 billion. In other words, the U.S. government treated preparing for a pandemic as a nigh-trivial concern, or a matter roughly of only 0.01%, as important as modernizing the nation's stockpile of nuclear warheads. But Congress had been told plenty of times that this was a poor set of priorities, and for decades, public health experts and advocates have been warning of scenarios that were quite similar to the COVID-19 crisis. An episode of Vox's Netflix show Explained from the fall of 2019 described how a Chinese wet market, where humans and a wide variety of livestock are packed into close proximity to each other, and it could facilitate the spread of a novel influenza virus from animals to humans, and it could thus trigger a pandemic. In September 2019, a report that was commissioned by the World Bank and World Health Organization began, and there is a very real threat of a rapidly moving, highly lethal pandemic of a respiratory pathogen killing 50 to 80 million people. The first 2 decades of the 21st century also saw the SARS and MERS outbreak, two previews of how a deadly new coronavirus could cause a global catastrophe. Perhaps America could only have learned the hard way, only after seeing a novel pathogen kill hundreds of thousands of its citizens and shudder its economy and shed much of its social fabric would Congress finally see that spending the pittance on public health and significant downsides. And this is what I thought a little over a year ago anyway. Today, such an assessment looks far too optimistic. Now, as we talk about the Delta variant, basically as the Delta variant has reminded the complacent, the COVID pandemic is not over, and it's far from being over. And with an upwards of 616,000 Americans dead due to the virus and outbreaks still testing the hospital capacity in many regions of the country, Congress is already back to treating pandemic preparedness as a minor concern. The Senate's bipartisan infrastructure bill includes no significant investment in public health. But meanwhile, congressional Democrats are reportedly planning to scale back Joe Biden's proposed investment into pandemic preparedness by more than 80%. And whereas the president called for spending $30 billion on fortifying the nation's defense against contagious diseases, Nancy Pelosi and company plan to dedicate just $5 billion of their impending $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill to such purposes. The move is understandable, and it's also indefensible. Democrats have a razor-thin majority in the House, and to pass partisan legislature out of the Senate, the party cannot afford a single defection. Moderates in both chambers have a limited tolerance for both deficit spending and taxing the wealthy, but it's not clear that the party has had the votes to pass a $3.5 trillion spending bill, let alone one greater than that sum anyway. And yet the party's myriad ambitions for public investment cost far more than the $3.5 trillion, so something has to go. The pandemic preparedness is an easy line item to shrink for the same reason that it was an easy one to underfund the pre-COVID. The constituency with the greatest stake in preventing or mitigating the next public health crisis is unidentifiable, let alone organizable. The 600,000 Americans who died from COVID-19 over the past year and a half did not know in 2019 that they had a potentially life or death stake in the size of the CDC's budget. If the Democrats go small on pandemic preparedness, the victims of the next novel virus will not just light up Congress's phone lines, but by contrast, if the party scraps its plans to add dental, hearing, and vision benefits to Medicare, the AARP would make its discontent known. It's plausible that the Democrats could pass a large increase in pandemic funding on a bipartisan basis as part of an omnibus budget bill, or at least the Republicans would more plausibly support the $25 billion in pandemic preparedness funding than a $25 billion investment in child care. The $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill is Democrats' only vehicle for moving the partisan priorities. And so why spend a full $30 billion budget of that limited sum on a cause that both parties at least nominally support? The reasoning for this may be superficially and compelling, but it doesn't withstand scrutiny. If Republican support for funding pandemic preparedness could be relied upon, we would see such funding in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. In any case, Democrats can't bet that the nation's public health on Moscow Mitch's good sense. The inadequacies of America's existing pandemic fighting capacities are too myriad, and the stakes of increasing those capacities is considered to be too great. And to give the GOP veto power on the issue, America needs to establish manufacturing the surge capacity that can facilitate the rapid production of vaccines, test personnel, protective equipment, and syringes. We need to develop candidate vaccines for emerging viral threats and get them through early phase trials before they run rampant. We need to build up our chronically underfunded state and local health departments so that they can move more quickly to detect and respond to any outbreaks. We need to invest in the research and development of anti-pandemic moonshots like a universal influenza vaccine. We need to develop better therapeutics like antivirals and monoclonal antibodies that can reduce the death toll of any future outbreak. It is madness to suggest that the U.S. cannot afford to do all of these things to protect itself and the world from another epidemiological disaster. By one estimate, COVID will cost our country more than $16 trillion. The true cost of the pandemic, however, cannot be fully quantified. The knock-on effects of prolonged shutdowns and premature deaths are vast. As Alec McGillis documents in a recent ProPublica report, the pandemic eviscerated the communal life in America's most disadvantaged neighborhoods, denied kids with unstable homes the reprieve of school time, and left adolescents to while away their days with social media spats, enlarged the black market for firearms, and thus birthed the largest homicide spike in U.S. history. Democrats are rightly concerned with finding space in their $3.5 trillion dollar bill for investments in elder care, the paid leave, community college, and other vital social programs. But the inadequate investment in public health threatens the core objectives of such programs. COVID has harmed the elderly more than expanding access to home care, and it would benefit them. The virus may well damage educational outcomes more than tuition-free community college would improve them. And it has reduced women's labor force participation more than child care subsidies, and it would be expected to increase it. In this sense, a $30 billion investment in pandemic preparedness would serve as an insurance policy for all of the bill's other programs. The American public is not known for its skill at risk assessment, but even the median voter recognizes that pandemic preparedness should be a congressional priority. In a recent Data for Progress poll, the voters supported further investment in pandemic preparedness by a margin of 83% to 11, rendering it the third most popular component of the impending reconciliation bill. In response to a terrorist attack that killed nearly 3,000 Americans, the U.S. spent more than $4 trillion in largely counterproductive and homicidal efforts to prevent the occurrence of such tragedies. In response to a virus that's killed 616,800 Americans, and it's continuing to count upwards, America can surely spend $30 billion, and to pay back that sum by 80% for the sake of placating the deficit phobic would be the opposite of fiscal responsibility. So yeah.